And what are you doing to manage stress?
Not enough. Not enough. I don't really do a lot other than trying to manage lists and things like that. That's about it.
A lot of prayer. I'll tell you, I pray for my family that they don't get stress.
I think it'd be a good idea to live as well as you possibly can, physically, mentally. I also think it's a very good idea to have regular doctor checkups. I think it really makes a big difference.
If the kids come to me with problems and stuff, I just tell them it's the lifestyle you lead. What did you expect? I have my own problems today. We'll deal with you later.
I feel if you have a positive attitude at home and you stress that to your children, and because there's so much negative out there nowadays, and that's what the kids feed on. But as long as they're willing to talk to you and you're willing to talk to them, you have the positive attitude at home, you're going to have a positive, healthy life.
Welcome to the show. Today, we are talking about spiritual practices and disease prevention. More and more research is showing us that spiritual practices, and by spiritual practices, I mean things such as meaningful relationships, having a belief system, ability to forgive. These things can prevent chronic diseases. Stay tuned. Welcome back. With me today, I have Dr. Reed. Thanks for joining me again. And John Rowe. I thank both of you for being here. On the previous show, we talked about stress hormones and the chemical changes in the brain. We know, though, that through research, spiritual practices can help to relieve stress. So let's recap so we can bring the audience up to speed about some of the main stress hormones.
When we talk about stress, we're looking at brain functions. So here's our brain, and this is my cartoon version of brain, that affects our body. And three stress hormones that we talked about, Ruth, are number one, we talked about serotonin, and number two, we talked about dopamine, and number three, we talked about norepinephrine. Or adrenaline. So these are the things that this is just a review of what we talked about. Serotonin has to do with sense of feeling good, feeling calm, feeling secure. Dopamine has to do with having pleasurable experiences and meaningful experiences and having the motivation to do things. And adrenaline and norepinephrine has to do with alertness and concentration. But usually when you're undergoing intense stress, this level goes up so much to a point that it's not just a constant level of concentration, it exceeds that. And so what happens is that you actually have a overproduction of hormone that is normally good when it's produced in appropriate amounts, but it's produced way too much. And so there's a vasoconstriction, blood vessels tighten up, so your blood pressure goes up, your heart rate goes up, so your heart has to work so much harder, and your heart lacks oxygen, and that's the heart attack feeling that you get when you have the chest tightness. And when you have high amount of this hormone, the other two hormones drop. So you have lack of feeling of security and lack of sense of pleasure, or you don't have any reason or motivation to enjoy life anymore. And that's the feeling of depression when you undergo prolonged stress.
Coming up,
It's the imbalance of the brain chemistry leading to too much of the stress hormone. Initially, it's good for alertness and concentration, but if you have too much of it, then it can cause a lot of bad things in your body.
Then later,
having a meaningful relationship with other human beings, or whether it's having a good relationship with your higher power, all of those things will actually increase serotonin, increase dopamine, reduce the stress hormone like adrenaline, as well as cortisol.
Right. So we've talked about stressors. What do you think we can do in today's society to manage the stressors, the children, the families?
I think it'd be a good idea to live as well as you possibly can, physically, mentally. I also think it's a very good idea to have regular doctor checkups. I think it really makes a big difference.
I think that everybody should retire. Then they'd have no stress in their life.
Except where to find money.
Yeah. And they get sick, then there's stress. Like me, I've lost my sight, and it's stressful because I have to depend on other people. But I'm happy about it. I retired and I'm enjoying it. I enjoy being pushed in a wheelchair by my son.
Well, the way I look at it, like if the kids come to me with problems and stuff, I just tell them it's the lifestyle you lead. But did you expect I have my own problems today? We'll deal with you later. I just don't let it get to me anymore. I mean, they're grown now, so what can I do? If you don't want to change it, I can't change it. I have to worry about what's going on with me and mine. So, I just tell God every night, they're in your hands, take care of it. That's all I can do.
So try to deal with the stress. It's just get away, take off, and maybe yoga is the best. So that's what I think, how to deal with the stress.
I feel if you have a positive attitude at home and you stress that to your children, and because there's so much negative out there nowadays, and that's what the kids feed on. But as long as they're willing to talk to you and you're willing to talk to them, you have the positive attitude at home, you're going to have a positive, healthy life normally. But it just depends. If you got to run around with a narrow-minded person or whatever, then you're going to have the stress, then you're going to have the diseases. So as long as you keep a positive attitude, you're going to be okay. Everything's going to look up day by day.
So what are some of the things you are doing to manage stress?
Well, I sit in my chair a lot and watch TV.
Well, he's not paralyzed. He had a lot of prayer involved with that. Yeah.
So a lot of prayer?
A lot of prayer. I'll tell you, I pray for my family that they don't get stress, because it is difficult. When you start being stressed out, it brings on, your hypertension, your high blood pressure, brings on other things that are difficult to handle, and it ends up like my daughter's in the hospital now, right here. I came to see her, and I think a lot of that was from stress.
Not enough. I don't really do a lot, other than trying to manage lists and things like that. That's about it.
The one hormone that I wanted to kind of start out today's episode is trust hormone, which is called oxytocin. And so this is kind of basically what happens, the imbalance of the brain chemistry leading to too much of the stress hormone. Initially, it's good for alertness and concentration, but if you have too much of it, then it can cause a lot of bad things in your body.
Going back to spiritual practices and the scientific evidence, now, let's, first of all, Dr. Ree, can have a say.
Oh, sure.
We have more research saying that spiritual practices can prevent the majority of chronic diseases.
Sure.
Yet, in my experience, a lot of healthcare providers are still reluctant to incorporate patient spiritual practices. Why do you think that is the case?
I think a lot of times when we talk about spirituality, there is some religious connotation.
Yeah.
And religious connotation has to do with, meditation, praying, and so forth. But, you can actually ask your patient what their preference is.
Right.
And if they don't actually want to have a specific type of religious practice, they could always, do, meditation and relaxation techniques. And that is a form of spiritual practices, because spirituality has to do with taking care of your existence.
Right.
It's the meaning dimension of personal existence. So whatever gives meaningfulness to your existence, that is the broadest definition of spirituality. So they don't have to think of it as a religious practice per se.
Right.
But it could certainly include religious practices because
Yes.
research shows that if you actually undergo praying activities, it actually calms down and releases all the feel-good hormones
Right.
as opposed to stress hormones.
Yeah.
And research shows that. Yeah.
And I think also that some healthcare providers are not comfortable with their own spirituality. So they are concerned,
Right.
Well, if I bring this topic up, maybe the patient will not embrace it. So as a result, they just don't.
Shy away from it.
Exactly. So, John, you are a nurse and you've worked with a lot of patients and you've seen the effects of faith with
Absolutely.
regards to health outcomes. So share your experience.
I found when I was doing home health care for Loma Linda, for example, I had patients who had life-threatening illnesses such as cancer, other major problems, and I would always offer prayer with them if they were open to it. And I found that their quality of life improved
Right.
as a result. I had one fellow who was in a fetal position. He had been diagnosed with cancer, and he'd shriveled up to the fetal position. And as we talked, I asked him what he would like to gain out of the remainder of his life.
Right.
And he said, I want to drive my car. And we put together some things step by step to regain his strength because he was too weak to stand and walk initially. But within about a month or so, we had him walking around his mobile home park. And within a couple of months, I was driving down 215, and he passed me on the freeway. He had driven back from Page, Arizona, and he lived another year and a half.
Wow. Because of faith.
Because of faith.
We know that people who express their spirituality through maybe religiosity or through meaningful relationships or ability to forgive live longer.
Right.
Research has shown us that, and they can prevent diseases. And this is all part of lowering the stress hormones. And what else is going on in the brain with spiritual practices?
Yeah, okay, so if you talk about spirituality, I think spirituality can include religiosity,
Yes.
the formality
Right.
of the experience.
Right.
And also there's a social connectedness.
Yes.
The social behavior, the social support. And then there's also a meditative behavior or relationship with a higher power. And
Right.
when you actually undergo all those experiences, whether it's church attendance,
Right.
religiosity,
Right.
or whether it's having a meaningful relationship with other human beings, or whether it's having a good relationship with your higher power, all of those things will actually increase serotonin, increase dopamine, reduce the stress hormone like adrenaline, as well as cortisol.
Right.
And cortisol I will talk about in the next part of
Right.
this segment. And so it reduces the negative hormones and then increases the positive hormones. And there is definite connection between the positive spirituality, good spiritual experience,
And negative spirituality.
and a positive health outcome. Now there is a negative religiosity
Yes.
that is only concentrating on formality without the meaningfulness.
And rituals.
And
it can be
ritual-
stressful.
And that could actually cause even more stress.
Absolutely.
And so religiosity can be good or bad. Generally, spirituality is good.
Right, because it has to do with the
Meaningfulness.
meaningfulness.
That's right.
Well, let's take a quick break. When we come back, Dr. Ree will illustrate to us what goes on in the body during these spiritual practices. That way we have a better understanding how spiritual practices can actually prevent disease and extend lives. Stay tuned.
Coming up.
So an example of negative spirituality is feeling guilty if they don't read the Bible, if they don't pray. And the guilt part of it is the negative aspect of the spiritual practice.
And the guilt brings on emotional stress, which is really bad for your health. So tell me, how do you define stress?
Headaches, heart disease, which is what my husband's in here for right now. Stomach aches. I mean, it all depends. Your nerves. It all depends on what, So
I think it's a matter of a lifestyle, whether you have a happy one or whether you don't.
Stress is something that taxes you one way or another. It's something that you don't normally encounter. It can be at work or so forth.
Stress is a kind of thing you can't handle anymore. At your workplace, at home, or when you're socializing with anyone, that leads to stress.
It causes all kinds of different diseases in the body. If the frame of mind is not correct, well, neither will the body be. So it leads to different things. It just depends on the variety of the body, what's got it going on and everything. So it can cause a lot of different things.
You can't function anymore, and that leads to breakdown, anxiety attack, and leads to fight, maybe with the spouse or coworkers. So it's not good for you.
I do believe stress can lead to at least bad health.
Okay.
Whether it leads to disease or not, certainly it can lead to, I think, ulcers, things of that nature.
Welcome back. Today we are talking about spiritual practices and disease prevention and managing stress. With me is Dr. Ree and John Rowe. And before the break, we were talking about positive spirituality, negative spirituality. Let's talk about that for a little bit before you illustrate to us what goes on in the body during spiritual practices. There are people out there who actually practice what we call in health negative spirituality. Negative, not to judge them, negative because it's bad for their health.
Right.
Okay, so let's talk about that.
Yeah, negative spirituality usually has to do with religious formality and going through the rituals, going through a certain routine, and feeling guilty if they don't go through those
Absolutely.
things. So an example of negative spirituality is feeling guilty if they don't read the Bible, if they don't pray. And the guilt part of it is the negative aspect of the spiritual practice. Yeah.
And the guilt brings on emotional stress. And John, you've, like you said earlier, you've experienced spiritual practices at work with your patients. So tell us, have you experienced like negative spirituality, or people get turned off by your approach to spiritual practices?
I've never had any. Initially, I had a couple of people, when I asked if they minded if I prayed with them, they said no. And then I said, well, I hope you don't mind if I pray for you in our absence. And the next day when I started to leave, and I always prayed before I went into a person's home. And when I got ready to leave, aren't you going to pray with me today?
Oh, okay.
Everybody in there, turn off the television. We're going to have prayer in here. and from then on, no matter who it was, that's what their expectation was, because they realized that was a part of their trust in relating to you as a person. I let them know where my source of power came from. And their ability to trust me is because of my relationship with God.
Right. So, Dr. Ree, do you mind illustrating to us so the audience can have a better understanding of what really goes on in the body? Because we hear spiritual practices. People know that if you pray, if you have meaningful relationships, support groups, these are all good things. But I think people don't really understand what goes on in the body.
I'd like to use the word trust.
Yeah.
Because this is a most generic word, I believe, is that can be used in terms of relationship. Because spirituality ultimately has to do with your existence and your relationship with your fellow human being and your relationship with your higher power.
Right.
And so I'm going to tell you two very interesting stories. One story about the rabbits, and another story about people with high blood pressure. I'm going to call high blood HTN. Now, people with high blood pressure, actually they have, they're always on many medications.
Right.
But what the scientists actually try to do was how can we actually reduce blood pressure of these patients without using too much medication, or without possibly lowering the dose or eliminating the medication. These are usually, early to moderate, initial to moderate stage hypertensive patients. And what they did was they actually divided the people into two groups. One group actually received human companionship, and another group received pet companionship. And they wanted to know which companionship was more effective in lowering blood pressure. Now, think with me, Ruth and Mr. Rowe. Which group do you think was more effective in lowering blood pressure?
The animal.
The animal.
Unconditional love.
Yeah, right. The pet companionship or human companionship?
Pets.
Pet companionship.
Unconditional love.
Yeah. Now, there was also another group that actually had no companionship whatsoever. So the group that had no companionship was the worst. Now, pet companionship was the best in terms of lowering blood pressure. And why that was? It was because of the unconditional love. Pets don't talk back. Pets don't nag. Pets don't give you that background stress.
Yeah.
Now, it is kind of sad to say that pets are better than human beings in lowering blood pressure, but the important aspect of this is the unconditional acceptance part of it.
Yes.
And so there is that companionship aspect that is very, very important in reducing even blood pressure.
Right. So Dr. Reed, now, what is going on in the brain?
What is going on in the brain? I don't know if I'm going to have time to tell about the rabbit story, but if I do, I'll tell it at the end.
Right.
But what's going on with this companionship, whether it's a human companionship or a companionship with a higher power, is that you actually produce hormone called oxytocin in the brain.
Right. And we talked about that briefly on the other show.
Yeah, and oxytocin generally, 16 years ago when I was doing my doctorate dissertation, we only thought that it was involved in ejecting milk for breastfeeding and ejecting baby for birth process, just contracting of the smooth muscle. But we're finding out that these babies who are breastfed, they actually have much better trusting relationships.
Absolutely.
Their IQ is better. Babies that are born naturally, as opposed to cesarean section, they actually have much better health outcomes. Why is that?
Coming up.
And as adults, we do produce these hormones.
And as adults, you produce hormone when you
good relationships.
Yeah, when you hug each other, when you smile at each other, when you're in a good relationship, you constantly produce this hormone.
I have type 2 diabetes, and I've had that for probably 30 years.
I've had diabetes since 1995.
I have watched all of the Bad Sugar series.
I have had diabetes since 1998.
I've watched the TV series Bad Sugar.
I'm a type 1 diabetic, and it's taught me how I can expand my lifestyle. It's taught me spiritually how to monitor my stress. It's taught me how, when I have an onset, how to calm myself down, my nutrition, how to exercise, and how I can fulfill my life without looking over my shoulder.
They clarified everything that the doctor was saying, but at a more slower pace, and to me, a very understanding pace to understand diabetes.
One thing I loved about it, it was pointing out, all of our new technologies and how the new, where we think one way that we're advancing in our technology, however, it's causing more stress if we don't monitor it.
Oh, I thought I knew, but I didn't. I had little knowledge, but that series expounded my knowledge.
For me, Bad Sugar have played a major important role in my life to control, to educate, and to teach others about diabetes.
It showed how God operates through us and how we need to connect with God in order to make sure that those sugars operate the way that they're supposed to.
Bad Sugar can teach you things that you know not of. It can help you expand your life. It can stop the problems, the health problems that you're going through. It can help you advance.
Bad Sugar.
There was things out there that I didn't know, and since I watched Bad Sugar, it's given me a lot of information that will help me further out.
Type 2 diabetes affects a lot of different things in your body, which I never knew about until I saw the episodes 7, 8, and 9.
I really find it very, very interesting and very knowledgeable for my health, how to understand, how to maintain, and how to eat properly to be able to control this disease, diabetes.
It's taught me about nutrition, it's taught me spirituality, and it's taught me how to live my life and enjoy myself longer.
I was able to reduce my medicine, and that's due to the fact of the Bad Sugar.
Call 1-866-257-3471. Operators are standing by. Or log on to PreventiveCareWeekly.com and place your order. Remember, knowledge is power. Bad Sugar DVDs will give you that power over diabetes. Get it now. Don't miss it. To order a DVD, go to our website, PreventiveCareWeekly.com.
But we're finding out that these, babies who are breastfed, they actually have much better trusting relationship.
Absolutely.
Their IQ is better. Babies that are born naturally, as opposed to cesarean section, they actually have much better health outcome. Why is that? Because during that process of the natural birth, there's so much oxytocin being produced, and there's so much oxytocin being produced in nursing, breastfeeding, that there is that bonding relationship that actually form even from the very first moment that they're coming out into the world and they're being nursed at the early stage of their infant life.
Right.
And that sets the stage for healthy outcomes.
And as adults, we do produce these hormones.
And as adults, you
when
produce hormone when you
good
actually,
relationships.
yeah, when you hug each other, when you smile at each other, when you're in a good relationship, you constantly produce this hormone, and you actually develop this trusting relationship. And with the oxytocin production, you actually have serotonin as well as dopamine being produced at the same time. So trusting relationship produces all three hormones.
Absolutely.
So not only do you have that trust, but you have the stability as well as the pleasure. What more can you ask for? All of these are natural antidepressant.
Right.
So if without these, if all you're trying to do is just taking pills like Prozac or Effexor or Zoloft or whatever antidepressants of your choice, you're only doing yourself a partial favor.
Right.
And it's only a temporary fix. But if you have this full experience with the 8 tips that I gave you in the previous episode, you're actually experiencing much fuller remedy that your body actually has for you and the nature has for you.
That's good. Now, John, going back to what you said, did you see people's health outcomes improved?
Yes, in a short period of time. We had a fellow 3 weeks ago who came in who did 2 tours in Desert Storm and the Iraqi wars, and he slept with a weapon under his pillow, this kind of thing, just no trust at all. He's been with us for 3 weeks, and he invited us to a barbecue at his place on the holiday that just passed a couple of days ago, and reaching out to associate with the other fellows who've been in the room because of the trusting relationship that's developed as a result of having similar experiences. Not all of them were good, but in this environment, they feel safe. There are people who would not even come out of their house, go to the malls at night.
Yeah, so John, what do you think happened when they felt safe? What hormone was produced in that relationship? Serotonin, stability,
exactly. Yes, exactly.
security.
Absolutely.
Exactly. And I can see them smiling more.
And when they smile, what's happening?
Dopamine.
The dopamine, the pleasure.
The pleasure, right.
And then they're bonding, they're actually hugging each other and they're like, they're supporting each other. Oxytocin is produced.
And when I walk into the room, everyone will give me a high five or, reach over and, touch fists, this kind of thing, a sign of acceptance.
Right. And this is a win-win situation because the more you do this, the more you see the improved health outcomes, you're motivated to want to do more, you see more health outcomes, so it's just a win-win situation overall. So I thank you so much for being here today, John. I really appreciate it. And Dr. Reed, thank you so much. And if you are at home watching, I really hope that this series on stress has really, really given you the tools to help you to prevent diseases. That is why I do this. For more information, please visit Preventive Care Weekly.